Welcome to the Family Milk Cow podcast, where in every episode I cover topics that equip you with the skills and know-how to look after your girls in the barn. Family milk cows are more than just livestock. They are a part of our families. They deserve the best care possible from knowledgeable and responsible owners. So pull up a chair or your milk stool and let's dive into another episode of the Family Milk Cow podcast. Hey there, welcome back to another episode of the Family Milk Cow podcast. I'm your host, Kelsey Wolf. You can also find me at the blog and YouTube channel, Rough and Tumble Farmhouse. In today's episode of the podcast, we are going to be talking about calf sharing and once-a-day milking. This is something I see a lot of in the family milk cow community. People want to have that wonderful fresh dairy from the farm, but they also want to be able to have a little bit of flexibility to have somewhat of a normal life as well. And a big way of how we can achieve that is through calf sharing and once-a-day milking. So I'm going to share with you my method, how I've done it over the last decade or so. This is definitely one of those topics where you got to figure out what works well for your family and what works well for your individual cow. So take all of it with a little bit of a grain of salt and make sure that you make this fit your particular situation, because just because it works this way well for me, it might not work perfectly this way for you. The first thing is let's talk about what calf shearing is and what once-a-day milking is, and they both pretty much are what they sound like. So calf shearing is when the calf stays with the mom for some or part of the day and they get milk, and then you also get milk when you go to milk. So you are sharing the milk from the mom. Once-a-day milking, just like it sounds, is milking only once a day. That might be in the morning, that might be the evening, I guess it could be the afternoon. It's whenever you want to milk. It's just once a day as opposed to the typical twice a day in most dairy situations. Now, I should say that just because you are calf sharing doesn't necessarily mean you are milking once a day. As a matter of fact, as we'll get into, when you first start milking a cow that's just freshened, you're likely calf sharing and still milking twice a day, And just because you are milking a cow once a day also does not necessarily mean that cow still has a calf with them. So, in the scenario I'm sharing with you today is in my situation where pretty much always there is a calf present to some extent with the cow, and I'm milking either once or twice a day, depending on where we're at in lactation. Let's talk about what calf sharing looks like for me and how I have done that over the years. Let's start with the cow freshening. She has a calf. Whenever she has that calf, right away, I'm going to start milking the mom whenever the next kind of typical milking time in the schedule would be. So if she has that calf midday, I'm going to milk her for the first time that night. If she has the calf later in the evening, I'm going to milk her for the first time the following morning. Now, unless you have an animal that has a lot of beef genetics or is maybe an older cow and doesn't produce that much milk or some other scenario like that, you will have to milk your cow twice a day from the start. Cows have been bred over the centuries to produce a lot of milk, more milk than their calves need. And so if you do not milk that cow, the calf is not going to be able to use all that milk. And especially if anyone listening here is a mom who has nursed their own babies, you know when that milk comes in, it comes in hard and fast and a lot. And so it's very important that right away you are milking that cow consistently twice a day at least, if not sometimes 3 times a day if they're a real heavy producer. So I will milk our cow twice a day until the calf is usually around 2 months, 2.5 months, give or take, when I start to see the milk reduce at one of the milkings. So that usually means at one milking, I'll be getting a fair amount. With Juneberry, she is 8 going on 9 now. She's 8.5. And this last season with milking, with the calf still on, this is not separating at all, calves with mom 24 hours a day. In the morning, typically I would get around 1.5 gallons to 2 gallons, and in the evening I would get the same. And then I started noticing that the evening milking I was getting less and less. So I'd still get that same amount in the morning, but in the evening I might get 1 gallon, 3/4 of a gallon, and it would just kind of slowly start heading down from there. Once I noticed that, then I start switching back to once a day milking. Now, the alternative to this is that you start pulling the calf and separating the calf if you'd like to. But for me, the priority is getting down to just milking once a day. No one else milks my cow for me. It's just me. And so for me, it's very appealing to get down to that once a day milking to give myself a little bit of a break. And for me, in the evening, I typically drop that evening milking. How do we do that? How do we go from milking twice a day down to milking once a day? So in my situation, what I usually do, since the evening milking is where she tends to kind of start to taper off, is I will start to try and increase the time in between her 2 milkings a day. So an example of how I would do that is, let's say usually I milk at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. on the dot. Let's say I'm very punctual. Side note, I am not very punctual with milking my cow, poor thing. She rolls with the punches very well, but definitely if you want peak production, milking at the exact same time every day is kind of one of those tips and tricks to get peak production. But case of argument here, let's say that I milk at 7 and 7 and I want to start getting down to once a day milking. I'm trying to drop that evening milking. I'd milk at 7 a.m. and the first night I might milk at 6:30. And I do that for maybe 2 or 3 nights. And then after that, I would milk at 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. and do that for a couple nights. And then I would milk at 7 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. And I would kind of start squishing those two milkings, bringing them closer and closer together and extending the amount of time because then she's going longer, of course, if she's being milked at, say, 4 in the afternoon and not until 7 in the morning, she's going longer than that kind of typical 12 hours between milkings. So you could also do that the other direction if your schedule doesn't allow for milking earlier. I'm home with my kids on our little homestead, and so it's not a big deal for me to bring that milking earlier. But let's say you're a person who works, you could move that milking the opposite direction to extend that time in between milkings. So let's say you milk at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. The next night, milk 7 a.m. or excuse me, the next day, milk at 7 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. and do that for a couple days. And then milk 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. for a couple days. And a lot of people might say that this is sort of a slow approach or unnecessary, but I typically like to do things slowly and incrementally so that the cow can more easily adjust, not like big, quick, drastic changes. Eventually, then you will be to the point where the milkings are fairly close together. And so I'd say once I'm at, 7 a.m. and maybe 1 p.m. or something like that within just a few hours, then I will just drop that second milking altogether. Now, when you do that, you can definitely expect to see that your cow is really going to be full of milk for those first few days. They're going to be very full, almost like kind of when they first came into milk, and that's okay. They typically should adjust within 3-4 days is what I see. Typically, they will adjust. All right, now let's talk about kind of the calf share portion of this. So for me, I just keep calf on mom for the first few months because I drop down to once a day milking. Usually, obviously, I get a little bit less milk now at this point since I'm just milking once a day. And then as long as I'm still getting enough milk, like what I want every single day, then calf still gets to stay with mom. So our calf was born in June this year. I didn't start separating the calf from mom until September. So that's just kind of a personal call. If you're not getting as much milk as you would like to, and it has nothing to do with the animal's nutrition or other things like that. It's just because the calf is starting to take more. Once your calf is a few months old, they're plenty old to supplement themselves with some hay as long as that's available, or you can choose to supplement the calf with a little grain if you want to. That's fine too. But how I do it simply is in the evening when I would maybe go down and be milking otherwise, I take the calf, I bring her into the barn into a stall where she has a nice place to be overnight. She's got water, she's got some hay. If you want to give a little grain, you can, and she goes in there separate from mom overnight. Then in the morning, I go down, bring my cow in, I milk her, and then when I put her back out to pasture, I send her calf out with her. So it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. So the calf is just separated for 12 hours. I milk, they get to go back together. You can do that the other way, of course, where you have them separated during the day and have them together at night, depending on how you want to do it, but I tend to prefer to do it that way. Now, a couple of just really simple tips in terms of separating calves. It is a good idea, I find, to have the calf somewhere where mom can see them, preferably where mom can smell them. In our setup, we have a barn with some stalls in it, and one of the stalls has an exit out into the pasture, and then another stall right next to it that's completely contained. To get the calf in more easily, I'll put just a flake of hay in the stall that's attached to the pasture, and then Juneberry will come in to eat the hay. Her calf comes with. I close the stall door so that way the calf doesn't get away. She is pretty well halter trained. She still doesn't like to be caught all the time. So that way I have her in a confined spot. I put her halter on, I bring her in. I like to give her a little bit of a brush and some snuggles and a little bit of grain out of my hand, again, because I'm just always working on making sure she's very tame and friendly. And then she goes into her stall for the night and I close her in. Then I open up the stall door out to the pasture that mom is in and I feed her the rest of her feed out in the hay feeder out in the pasture, wherever. I also then, the first few nights that I do this, we'll leave the light on in the barn, or I might even leave the mom penned in the barn too. Otherwise, there is a chance that mom will forget where her baby is and get upset, try and look for her, might try and break out. These are things that have happened before, so I recommend keeping baby where mom can see them. And if it's an area where you're able to have light on for the first few times, so that way it's easier for the mom to see, oh yeah, there's my baby, everything's fine. I recommend doing that if you can. Now let's talk kind of pros and cons of calf sharing and also sort of once a day milking. Again, the two can be separate things. They don't have to rely on each other, but I do find they tend to go hand in hand. So this kind of pros and cons is sort of assuming you are calf sharing while once a day milking and not just doing calf sharing, milking twice a day, or once a day milking with no calf. So I'm assuming you got a calf, you're milking once a day. So pros as far as I see them. This may or may not be a pro. It's also in the con list is you're going to get less milk. And for me, sometimes after I've been going through all summer of being the only one milking and using the milk for cooking and cheese making and everything else, having a little less in my fridge kind of feels like a blessing. Another pro is that you're going to have really typically healthy, big, beautiful calves. Consistently, whenever I have people out to the farm sort of later in the summer, if they're cow people, they'll go, "Gosh, how old is that calf?" And I'll say, "Oh, she's 3 months, 4 months. Wow, she's a really big, healthy looking calf." I said, "Yeah, she's been on mom's milk all summer." So you really get some beautiful animals when they are with their mom for sure. The other, I think, probably biggest pro here is the freedom that comes with once a day milking. I find that twice a day milking, as much as I love my cows, it does get old after the first couple of months. I'm really ready to be dropping that evening milking. It makes it easier if you've got kids' sporting events in the evening or you've got anything you're trying to do in terms of a social life in the evening. Not having that second milking a day really is incredible for freedom. It also is easier if you're having someone milk your cow for you so you can take a trip or something like that. It just makes a huge difference to only have one milking a day. If you do kind of a pros and cons list in a weighted format, there's definitely less pros, I would say, compared to the cons list we're supposed to get into, but the value of having that freedom for me outweighs just about all of the cons. There's definitely something to be said in terms of having the freedom of having your milk cow, but being able to have your evenings to yourself or your mornings, whichever you choose. All right, let's dive into the cons. So, the first con, which was also a pro, is you're going to have less milk. Maybe you do not want to have less milk, so you decide you don't want to share with a calf at all, and you wean the calf and supplement feed in some other way, so you have all the milk to yourself. Another con that people don't often think about, but I make sure to mention to people that sort of have their milk cow dream and they're going to do once a day milking and it's going to be wonderful and they're going to make all this butter and have all their coffee creamer and stuff. Odds of your cow giving you the same amount of cream are very small. There are some real generous girls out there who are going to keep giving you the same amount of cream, but in my experience, the cream line dips down to just about nothing, just enough to maybe make your milk, kind of 2%. But I don't know. I don't think that they do it intentionally, but for whatever reason, the best milk, the primo stuff, they hold back for their calf. So if you are enjoying a beautiful cream line right now and you switch to calf sharing, more likely than not, you're going to lose most of that cream. Another potential con is this may increase the chance of your animal. Let's say you have a heifer that is your current calf and you're planning on keeping her as a replacement heifer, or you just want to have her to kind of build your milk cow herd. The longer the calves stay with their mom and nurse on mom, it seems from what I have seen that increases the chance that they might continue to try and nurse on their mother as adults. So that can be really tricky to navigate and to deal with, especially if you have a mom cow who's very generous and will of course let her previous daughters come back and nurse on her. But then that's a problem, of course, because they are taking milk from the actual calf that a mom may have just had, and they are also taking the milk that you want. So that's something definitely to consider in terms of the layout of your homestead and your farm. Are you able to keep daughters separate from mothers when they're older? Do you have plans for putting the kibosh on that so they're not able to nurse on their mom when they are full grown adults and now have a younger sibling that should be drinking from their mother? That is something that can be a risk or something you might have to deal with later because of extended calf sharing. Another con you should consider is cuts on teats. You will definitely see on your cow as calves get older, they are going to be much harder on a mom's teats. So you might see sort of vertical slices or cuts on the teats. Those are coming from the calves' teeth that are sharp and they get, kind of more aggressive and pushy and stronger as they get older and they start to really do a number on moms. There are some ways that I have heard and seen that you can do to deal with that. So we'll talk about that in a little bit here when we get into troubleshooting, but that is a potential issue. They're going to be kind of harder on their mom's udder. The last con on my list that I have is wilder calves. So if you are pulling a calf from their mom and you are bottle raising them or you take them away kind of earlier, they're going to get a lot more time spent with humans and they are going to have spent with cows. That is, of course, going to give you a much tamer animal as opposed to a calf that is raised just with mom all the time. There's a really great dairy that's not too far from here where they also have a raw milk cheese business, which is really great. And when we toured their farm, they were explaining that they used to let the moms rear their calves up, but they had just so much of a harder time training those calves in later that they then chose to start pulling calves from moms, just so it was easier in their system. So that is something you want to consider as well. Now, just a couple things here on troubleshooting that we'll run through. First of all, not all cows are going to be good candidates for calf sharing. Some cows might be too aggressive if they get to have their babies with them and they won't let you milk them at all. They might not let you near their calf. That's really going to depend on the temperament of the cow, and it's really, there's no way of knowing if that's going to be your cow or not. They can be as sweet as pie, and then baby comes and they turn into monster moo and they're not letting you anywhere near them or their baby. Some of them also will straight up refuse to let down milk no matter what you try. So that is also potential issue with calf sharing that you want to consider, is that your cow might not work for it. If you do have a cow who is not letting down her milk with the calf, a couple of things you can try is to have the calf present when you are milking so that mom can see them. That might help. You can also try and let the calf nurse while you're milking. So just decide, the calf's going to nurse on that side and I'm going to milk over here. That's not my favorite option because the calf tends to be pushy and slobbery, and it is kind of hard from a sanitary perspective. I've struggled with that, but I know some people have had luck doing that option. And another thing you can try is you can bring the calf in, let the calf nurse for a little bit, and then when the mom has let down her milk, you pull the calf out and then you milk and then send her back out with her calf afterwards. The last thing that I previously mentioned, of course, is cows getting cuts on their teats, and a way to potentially help with that is by filing the teeth of the calf. Now, this sounds somewhat horrible, but it would be very akin, I think, to floating teeth in horses. I've not done this one personally, but I have read anecdotally that people even use something just like a really good sturdy nail file and just file off that little razor sharp edge on the end of their teeth. We're not talking anything extensive. We're talking a few like quick rasps with a file to take off that slicing edge so they can still graze and snip grass appropriately, but you're just taking off that really sharp portion on the edge. Calf sharing has really worked out wonderfully for me and my family for a lot of years. I love how beautiful and healthy the calves are. I love being able to milk once a day. The whole system just works out really well, and I really enjoy it. So calf sharing and once a day milking might be the ticket for you. If you are a once a day milker, or a calf sharer and have anything you think I should have added to this, please head over to Instagram and check out Family Milk Cow Podcast there. Shoot me a DM. I would love to add people's ideas and thoughts to this on Instagram if anyone else has any other points that I maybe missed in this episode. Now, already here, this is episode 5 of the first season of the Family Milk Cow podcast. This first season is just a mini season. It is sort of my pilot season of the podcast, where I'm sort of figuring out things a little bit from a technology standpoint and working on scheduling guests for future seasons. So make sure you check out our last episode is going to be coming out next week. I will have some bonus episodes that are going to be coming out that you can get access to if you head on over to Patreon there. We still have the promo going on where you can get a free Milkmaid Brigade sticker if you join the Milkmaid Brigade at any level. So it's pretty exciting to hop on over there, start building community with other great milk cow people, and get some really cute stickers at the same time. All right, thanks guys. We will see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Family Milk Cow podcast. You can become a part of the Family Milk Cow podcast by joining the Milkmaid Brigade, sponsoring an episode, or following along on social media. You can find links for all these and more, including show notes, at familymilkcowpodcast.com. If you love what you're hearing, please rate, review, subscribe, and turn on those automatic downloads. One of the best ways to support this show is simply by sharing it. And as always, make sure to give your girl down in the barn a good scratch behind the ears from me.